Okay, hello everyone, I'm John from Nicklin Gaming, and today I'm going to give you a video that I wish I had. So, I'm going to be talking all about the Firebase Rules. Now, if you're like me, you use Firebase quite often because it's much easier than using Mongo database and setting up your own servers and whatnot. However, while it is easier, it is infinitely harder to work with in the complicated areas. But as a student, it's perfect. And now that I've left being a student, I would like to continue using it. But the rules of the real-time database are such a hassle, and getting those weekly emails of, no, not weekly, but the daily emails of your database is not secure with absolutely no support to make it secure. They really do need to offer an option of, a small fee to have a professional come in and write the rules for your database if they're going to be harassing you with emails like this. So that's where I come in. I'm going to tell you all of the things that you need to know to make your database secure, stop those harassing emails, and protect your data at the same time, which is why they have those stupid emails in the first place. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is you need to go to your Firebase project. I have just created a test project for this. Then you need to create a real-time database. For this, I just go to Build and then to Real-Time Database. Now they do change this UI once every few months, so I cannot guarantee that by the time you see this video, this is where you will find the real-time database, but it should be fairly simple. There's even this All Products button where you can find the real-time database. And the next thing you need to do is you need to find this button or a button like it that says Create Database. Then you can set the database location. I'll put mine in the United States because that's where I would like my customers to be. And you can start in locked mode or test mode. We're going to be destroying the rules that they give us. Okay. So now I've got my database. And what the database does is the database stores data in JSON values. The rules that you write are also in JSON values as well. If you need some help with JSON, if you have no idea about JSON, there are two things that I recommend. The first thing, I always use this website, jsonviewerstack.hu. You can type in some JSON like this, and then I say name Paul, and then if I click format, it will format this. Now this doesn't just format JSON, this will format XML, this will format HTML, this will format just about every different type of programming language that you want. And it's a great and very powerful format button right here. Then you go to the viewer and you can actually see it. And it will tell you if your JSON is valid or not. So it's a very powerful website. Now to assist you with using this website, I do have another video that I will link down below in the details where I talk all about what you need to know to get started on JSON. So, right now I have my real-time database and I don't have anything in it, but let's see, what if I want to have some users? So I will say I have a users, my first user, let's name him Paul, like the Nickelodeon monkey, and I will actually, for Paul, he's not going to be named Paul, he's going to have some UID, so I'll just say UID 56555. And the key will be the value of Paul. Let's add another one. Let's give Paul an age. Paul's age is going to be 54. Let's say his species. Paul's species is a monkey. He's that three-eyed monkey. He's like, hi, I'm Paul. Now we have another user. This is going to be UID 33333. And let's add some values to this user. So this user's name is going to be, oh, I don't know, Mouse. The mouse's age is going to be 82, and the mouse's species is going to be snake. A snake named Mouse. Okay, so now I've got some users, but that's not the only database that I have. What if I have another database? Oh, let's call this one books. I have a database of books. Then I've got the UID for the book. Then the book will have a title. The title will be Shamu. I don't know. Maybe it has a publishing date. And maybe the publishing date is a string where it says 2002-03-20. Perhaps that's the publishing date. We can even, that's for another book. We can even say something like the number of pages, which will be 564. Then we have another UID, this will also have the title of book, a book named Book, a publishing date, and this one is very recent, 2023-03-34. Oh wow, very recent in the future and on a non-existent date. Number of pages. Now, of course, the data that you have in your database does not matter. I'm using this to give you examples of some things. And then the number of pages is going to be 10. Very good book named Book. However, let's actually go through because I want one more thing. In my users, I'm also going to say, I don't know, maybe my users have friends. And the friends is an inner object where they have, actually let's say another one where we say is happy, which will be a Boolean value of true. And my friends will be Carl, let's say name Carl and name Max, Carl Max. For the mouse, let's add these as well. However, one of the great things about Firebase is, well, Firebase and Mongo and most NoSQL databases is that you don't actually have to have the same data types in every object in a list. So I can most definitely omit the friends here. Okay, our mouse only has one friend named Sam and is happy. Well, he's a mouse, so we will say false. Okay, I will press enter. Now I've got my database. I have a database of books and I have a database of users. But what is to prevent the evil people of the world from going through and deleting everything in my database? Or even worse, what is to prevent them from hijacking my database and filling it up with data and requests. And if you are using a paid plan on Firebase, you can get charged for the things that people do. If you do not have an upgraded plan on your Firebase, then at the very least you would have your Firebase locked up to where you can no longer use that database anymore because you've used all of your monthly uses. So if we actually look at this, I've got usage quotas for Database Firestore, storage, phone auth, hosting, and test lab. And my ability to extend my project with my Google Cloud is not existing, and I have analytics, crash reports, but we can see what else exactly does it have. So for my authentication, I can only authenticate 10,000 people a month, and that can be quite a lot when you're dealing with 100, 200 people. But think of this, if we have, let's open up our calculator, we have 100 people. They log into your game 2 times a day. Okay, so they need to be authenticated twice a day. Now, most people log into video games much more often than that, but we'll start with the basic. We have 100 people logging into our application 2 times a day. And they do that, well, let's not say 31 days a month, because that's, a little bit too much, but we can say 20 times 20. So now with just 100 users logging in 2 times a month, 20 days a month, that is already using half of your stuff with just 100 users. Also, if we look at our functions, so I always like to use the real-time database just because the use cases that I have fit the real-time database much better than the cloud Firestore. So the Firestore says that we're only allowed to store 1 gigabyte of data. We can write to the documents 20,000 times a day. We can read from the documents 50,000 times a day. And we can delete 20,000 times a day. So that's pretty good on Firestore, but if someone is able to access your database rules, they can easily write a function, or if they can get past your database rules, they can easily write a function that would allow them to go over that. Now, the thing I like about real-time database is none of this is dependent on how many connections you have. Well, this has the 100 simultaneous connections, but there are very rarely that many people connecting at the same exact time. You can store 1 gigabyte of data, which is a good amount, especially if you are storing basic string values, and you can download 10 gigabytes a month. So, this is just the pricing parts, and we've talked a lot about why you want rules. You've seen that using the paid things, you can easily, with the right knowledge, destroy someone's life by charging their bank, millions of dollars just because you had it looping on a fetch, or, looping on a write, or dumping a large amount of data. And even now you can, do that to other games by just using the game. But okay, without further ado, let's go into our rules, and we want to write some rules to help us with this, or to keep only this data in the format that we want in our database. So we are going to write some rules to prevent anything other than this data in this format from being written. So let me move this all the way over, as far as I can. Okay, now I will go into the rules. Because I started my database as a fully secure thing, it starts with read and write at false. Now there are three very important things that you need to remember, and I will have a link eventually to my GitHub where I will have a list of the different things, an example of how to use them, and a description of what they do in my GitHub linked to this video. However, it will take a few days after this video is posted to get that typed up. Okay, so the first thing you need to know about is read. The second thing you need to know about is write. There is one last thing that you need to know about, which is validate. So, read means they can grab data. If you know about databases, then you've heard of CRUD. Create, read, update, delete. Read is they can look at the data. This can be very dangerous as well because you may not want someone to be able to read the data in your database. If you're using books and users, then sure, read the data. However, remember that you do pay in Firebase with an upgraded account when people read from your database too much. So you can definitely be charged from people just looking at your database. Not to mention that if you want to keep your data secure, if you're well, I would be very disappointed if any financial institutions decided to have a readable database. But just imagine that you are a developer working on a super secret project that your competitor wants to steal, and you have read true on your database. Then your competitor can go in, look at all of your database, and even steal and clone your database. So that's what read does. Write does the create, update, and delete. So read is just one function. Read is just for read. But write will create data, write will update data, and write will delete data. So most definitely the most important rule in your database will be your write rules. And finally, validate. Validate is a way to determine if the read and writes should be allowed. So you can have your read and your write rules, and then you can have a validation rule on top of it. A good way for this is, if we look at my data, I might say the UID 333 write rule is true if the user is authenticated and the data doesn't exist and the new data is not deleting this data. Then I will say not only is it true there, but it needs to validate that the age is a number, that the friend has a group of names or an array of names with a string value. The name is a string, the species is a string, and is happy is a Boolean value. And I would validate that all of those things are true before I allow the user to write to my database. Otherwise, if you do not specify the data types that go into the areas, then they can easily override your read and write rules by just saying, oh, I'm writing data here, but instead of age 82, I'm writing age, and then a whole other database of information that is going to charge you a ton of money. Now, I have been talking about how you can get charged on Firebase a lot, and I've also said it a lot, but I do want to reiterate, Firebase is free until you upgrade, until you provide credit card bank account information to Firebase. You will never be charged. They cannot charge you until you provide that information. What they can do, however, is they can stop you from accessing your database until the next month. And there is nothing to stop the hacker who maxed out your database to do it again next month. So that is why the rules are important. Okay, now with read, write, and validate, you have two values. You have true or you have false. True and false are Boolean values. That means either yes or no. So if you want people to be able to read all of the database, say true. If you don't want them to, say false. But there are a few other things that I want to talk to you about. So there's a thing called auth. But for this we need quotation marks. And we say auth. Now auth refers to the authentication token passed along with the database when a get or fetch or update or delete or create message is passed to the database. And so if you only want authenticated users, so users that were authenticated by your authentication methods up here. So first you would authenticate the user, and then you go into the database, and Firebase passes it on automatically. So usually you do not want anyone who is not authenticated to access your database, unless you don't care about authentication, in which case you should find some other method of verifying that people are accessing your database through your proper channels. But that is not enough to stop people from abusing your database. So what we can say is auth is not equal to null. Now pay attention, because in most programming languages, not equal is exclamation mark equals. However, in Firebase, not equals is the exclamation mark with a double equal sign. And I believe equals would be the triple equals sign. Okay, so auth not equal to null, that would tell us that the authentication person exists. So is the authorization valid? Have they been authorized? Then yes, this would be true. If the authorization is null, then this would be false. So perhaps I will be making a Boolean value YouTube video next or later to help with this. There are also two other very important things called data and newData. So let me just type these out. So data and newData. Data is the data that is currently in your database. So this is my data. The new data is the new data that you are pushing onto the database. So we can see that I have the get, the create, update, and delete, or set as they say. Poorly worded. They should have create, read, update, and delete. But Firebase has always been a bit backwards. Okay, so the data is the data that you read, the data that you get. You can get all of this data. This is the data that currently exists. New data is the new data that I want to set, update, or delete. This is new data. So let's just stick with my write. So what do you do if you want to write, you want to add data to your database only if the data does not already exist? So I want to be able to add books, but only if the book UID 123123 does not already exist. Otherwise, I would delete my book, and I don't want to delete book. It would override the data I have here. So what you need to say, if you do not want to override data, you would say write only if data dot exists, and then you need to say not. So the write is only true if the data does not exist. That means you cannot override data. So data does two things. It does it's for creation and it's for updating. If we say that not data exists, then we can only write if the data that we want to add does not already exist, or the place that we want to add our data to does not already have data in the place. Then, if you say that you want to only be able to add data, you only want to be able to update data. So you cannot create data, you can only update it. Then you would have data exists. So if I push UID 565, I cannot do that with these rules because there is not a UID 565. There is only UID 123123 and UID 1232131323. So I can only update existing data with data exists. Another thing, so let's go back to I can only create data. So this is only creating new data. Then I can say and with the two and symbols. This is the logical and, so this and this must be true, otherwise everything is false. Or otherwise the result is false. So if the data does not exist and the new data dot exists. So what this is saying now is it's saying that you can only write if this is new data, if we are creating data, not updating, and we actually have data to create. So this is saying that the data at the end of this must exist. There must be some data, otherwise we cannot write to our database. Another thing is you can say not new data exists. So this only allows you to, well, these rules would be contradictory. So you can only write if the data exists and we are deleting this data. So this is only for deleting. This says you are only allowed to delete data. So just know that data is the data now. New data is the data you are sending to the server. The new data that you want to override whatever is in there. Okay. Now on top of this, you can validate the data with a few things. Now when I say validate, you can use these rules for the read and write as well. But let's look at something like this. So, for my overall rules, I want to be extra careful. If nothing else is set, then the reading is false and the writing is false. Then I want to say for books. So I will say BOOKS, and do try to be case sensitive as much as possible. I am not 100% positive if Firebase is actually case sensitive, but it is best to not risk it. So we have the books, and then we have the users. Now, if you decide to store data in the method that Firebase recommends, you could also do something like read is true if the auth.uid is equal to, and then, so here, let me actually write it over in the books. So if I say books, and then I say, we'll talk about what this is later, UID, and then I say that you can read, oh, we need to put that, there we go. So you can read only if the auth.uid, so the UID of the authentication token in the authentication database is equal to $UID. So this would be actually very good for our users. So if you store your users by UID, then you can make sure that the user can only read or write to the UID that matches their authentication UID, the UID that they authenticated with. Now that is a good way to secure data, but it is a bad way to manage data. Okay, so let's keep going. And I will explain what exactly this is later. So, oh, actually right now. So you see that we have UID 123123 and UID 123213123, and I cannot just go through and say, because we want to have many UIDs that we do not know of at this time, and I cannot just say if the books at the child UID 123123 and then give it rules there, because I have no idea what this child name will be. Now, if you don't know what the child name will be, then you use a $sign. The $sign creates what is called a wildcard, but you do need to give it a name. So a wildcard means it can be any name for this title. Now I can even continue on with my read and write as false inside of here. And then I say with my UID, which is this, then I need to make sure that it has the child NOP, publishing date, and title. So I will say dot validate. Now, validate would turn your read or write to false if the validate is false. We might need to change these later to something a bit more forgiving than just false. Maybe we will set it to something like auth doesn't equal null.
let's see, and we want to write to the books. We do not want to be able to delete a book, so but we do want to create, and do we want to update the books as well? No, let's not allow updating. So we only want to allow creation. We do not want to allow deletion, and we would like to not allow yes. So we can only write if the auth equals null and the data dot exists not. So we are only allowed to write if the user is authenticated and it is new data. This means that we are not allowed to update, we are not allowed to delete, but we are allowed to create. On top of this, we also are requiring a validation where we say it is valid if the new data dot has the children. So you can see that each one of these is a parent-child relationship. Books is a parent. UID 123123 is the child of books. UID 123123 is the parent of no P, publishing date, and title. UID 123123 is not the parent of the children of UID 123213123, and UID 123123 is not the parent of UID 333. Books is also not the parent of users or UID 333. However, users is the parent of this. Okay, so we want to validate that the new data has the children. If you just say data has the children, then you're looking at the current data, and that might be good if you want to only update data in certain circumstances. So we have the children of, and for this we use a single quotation mark inside of the double quotation mark. So NOP, try to keep the case. Then we have the publishing underscore date, and then our final child is the title. So this will allow you to read and write only if the data that you are trying to read and write has these three children. On top of that, you can go a step further to access the children specifically. So let me say I want the no P, I want the publishing date, and I want the title. Then I will add another wildcard. So wildcard other. So this will be anything that is not called, that does not have the title, no P, publishing date, or title. And you cannot use multiple wildcards as well, because there is no distinction between the two wildcards, because it takes, anything that is not specifically mentioned before. Okay, so we say the no P, and then we want this to be dot validate. Now again, you can also say read or write here, but we will validate it if the new data, now this will automatically tell us the new data of rules, books, UID, no P. So it already does the child for us when we access the new data that we are trying to add to no P. So with this, we want to make sure that it is a number. So we say is number. So we can only write to nowP if the new data that we want to write is a number. If you want to only allow the conversion of a string to a number or a number to a string, you can do that too by saying, I'm not sure why you would want to, but you can. You can say data is string and data is number. You can even put these in parentheses and you can say or data dot is number and new data dot is string. Now I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but you can. This will say that you can only add data if the old data is a string and the new data is a number, or the old data is a number and the new data is a string. But I will remove that because I find that not fitting any use case that I can think of. Okay, so now we are validating the nowP. However, we also want to validate the title and the publishing date. So the publishing date, while it is a date, it's in the format of a string. So we will say is string. Make sure that you add your commas between everything as well, otherwise you will have issues. And our title is also another string. Now, because Firebase is poorly written, it will add extra parentheses when you type is string after removing is number, so you need to be careful there. And for other, I'm just going to say read and write is false. So I'll say read, write, and even dot validate is false. So everything that is connected to something other than what I wanted will be not just ignored, but will break everything else. It will say no. Okay, and if you do have something that you want to add, but you don't exactly require it. So say that our publishing date, we're fine if it does not exist, so we can say or new data equals null. So our new data can be empty. Let's look at this. Okay, so it looks like we just want a double equal sign. Perhaps we need this to help out Firebase. Okay, then we can say new data dot exists. We'll do that instead. Not exists. So say that we don't want to add the publishing date to our object all the time. But when we do add it, we want to require that it is a string. So we say that the new data for publishing date must either be a string or it must be null. It must not exist. And that's how you can do that. And that's with books. But if we look over here at our users, we have friends, which is an inner object. And for that, we will need to use an inner HasChildren. And we can even say HasChild as well if you wanted to only have one child to it, or if you only want to check for a single child. Okay, but remember, the nowP with no $ will look for this specific child title, the no P. The $UID will look for anything that we have not specified. For example, no P publishing date title, $other would be anything that is not title, publishing date, or no P. Okay, so let's minimize the books and let's look at our users. So we already grabbed the UID, and sure, we can say that we only want the read and write if the authorization UID is equal to this UID. Now, you don't have to follow this. In fact, depending on what you are using, you might not want to, because it can really mess with your database. Okay, so let's look. We have age, friends, name, species is happy. So let's add our dot validate and then semicolon space, and we say newData dot has, and we have many of them, so we say HasChildren, and you must add these brackets. If you use HasChild, you would keep it as a single entry, so single like this. But we want to grab many children at once, so we say HasChildren. Okay, so the children that we want to grab are age, friends, name, species, and is happy. Also, a quick note, in our books, if you are going to say that publishing date is allowed to be null, then you just want to remove it from this list, because then it will return false if it does not have a publishing date, which we want it to be true without a publishing date. Okay, so then we have age, friends, name, species, and is happy, and you would just go through with our books, with what we did in the books, to add the extra validation. So let's do that now. We will go through it very quickly, so I will type age and then the curly brackets, and then I say new dot validate colon quotation marks newData dot is number, and then let's add a comma there. So age, friends, name, species is happy. Okay, let's grab friends, name, species, and is happy. Is happy we want to be a Boolean value. Species we want to be a string, is string. Name we want to be a string, is string. The friends we will do a whole thing, so we want to say newData dot actually so our friends can have many things at the name or with the title name, but I will just say, I will just ignore the friends part and have it be true. So I'll say dot validate. And if you do have many different UIDs here, then you would just do the something like this. So I think, yes, I will do that. So I will say $. Or actually, let's just say yeah, that would be hard because I'm not sure how that would work out. Let me publish these rules. So it's not going to allow me to publish these rules, and it's not going to allow me to leave the page to look at data. So let's just say true. What is this? It's expecting. Okay, we need to add a comma under validate. Okay, there we go. So let's look at our data, because Firebase can deal with, yes, as you see, they overrode the things with the same title in our array. So they can be a bit weird with how they handle arrays, or really just non-existent. So instead of name, you would want to do something like another UID. So we would say the friends at, I'll call it the $friend ID colon, and then I will say dot validate if the newData dot is string. So the friend that we want to add is only valid if their data is string. So those are some basic rules. These are, of course, not all of the Firebase rules. I've also not talked about indexing, but these are the general descriptions that you will need to get through many Firebase headaches. Okay. Well, thank you for watching. If you are interested in learning more, please let me know and I can work on a video to help you out there. And oh yes, one last thing. Well, we don't really need it because we say read and write is false here. But instead of saying read and write as false there, another thing you could say is to have the $other, and then you can have the read and write false. But okay, I will end the video here. Thank you for watching. I really hope that these rules helped you, and have a great day.